This is a joint audit committee meeting of the New York City Municipal Water Finance Authority and the New York City Water Board. I'm Max von Holwick, the chair of the committee. I'm a member of the Water Finance Authority Board. Could we have a roll call, please?
Max von Holwick.
Here.
Basil Segos.
Robert Elburn for Commissioner Segos.
Alfonso Carney Jr.
I'm here.
Adam Freed.
Present.
Jonathan Golden.
Here.
Mark Shaw.
Yes.
We have a quorum.
Great. First order of business, as always, is need a resolution to approve the minutes of the prior meeting, which was on October 19th of last year.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. You all have a copy of the minutes in your folders. Does anyone have any comments or questions about those minutes?
None, sir.
Hearing none. Any objection to passing the resolution?
None.
Hearing none, so passed. Second order of business is an item that's required by Section 3K of our Audit Committee Charter, and that requires us to issue an annual report which details our activities for the prior year, and also to conduct a self-evaluation of our performance, including our compliance with our own Audit Committee Charter. There's a draft of the annual report that we would propose to submit in your package. Describes the actions that we took during the last year, meetings on June 16th of last year and October 19th of last year. There's also a draft of the resolution before you that serves to approve that annual report and also to I guess, resolve that we have acted in compliance with our Audit Committee Charter and satisfied our self-evaluation requirements. Any discussion of that motion or of our annual report? Any objections to the resolution?
None.
Hearing none, it's passed. Third item of business is a review item, and that concerns a review of the Water Authority and the Water Board's internal control policies. I don't believe there have been any changes to the Water Board policies that we have in place. I know there are a few small changes to the authority's internal controls. I think you have drafts of both policies, including a marked version of the authority policies. If anyone has any questions, people here from the authority to address them, but
They're mostly clarifying in nature and
Yeah.
clean up.
Absolutely.
yeah.
Thank you.
So hopefully you've had a chance to look at those in advance of the meeting and have no questions about those. And the last item is a presentation of the audit plan for the coming year, including a discussion of new accounting and auditing standards. And we have our controller, and we have Warren Ruppel, who's a representative of Marks Paneth, who's the authority in the Water Board's accounts. Turn it over to you guys.
Yes, so I'll turn it over to Warren Ruppel, who will go through his required communication.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Also here with Dan McElwee, who's the senior manager on the account. Basically, there's some requirements for me to go through in accordance with the auditing standards, but essentially the meeting's an opportunity for us as the outside auditors to meet with the audit committee, the joint audit committee, prior to the start of our audit. I have some inquiries regarding fraud to ask you as we go along. I'll ask you if you have any input into the audit process or particular areas that you'd like us to look at. And I'll briefly describe the scope of our audit. So just go through the materials that were distributed. The first tab is just some contact information for myself, Dan, and some other members who were on the team. The required communications are really contained in the second tab, so if we can go to that. One page into the third page in, which is numbered page 2. Just to describe our responsibility to perform the audit in accordance with U.S. generally accepted auditing standards, as well as government auditing standards. Government auditing standards part, there's some federal programs which are kind of part of the city's single audit, and that's required to be done in accordance with government auditing standards. So we perform our audit of the financial statements in accordance with government auditing standards. The timing of the audit is laid out here as we compare it to last year, and you can see that we plan to start the field work about a week earlier than in the past, and reporting in October. So the dates for last year, the actual presenting to the audit committee and board approval. That occurred in mid-October. We issued the financial statement shortly thereafter. I'm going to turn it back to Bob briefly because he's had some correspondence from the city controller's office regarding that time.
Sure, so we have to bring up our timing, as you would have gotten a copy of a letter to the water board from the controller's office. They're asking that we have the approval of our financial statements by October 16th. And this is just really logistically because our financial statements are combined with the city's comprehensive annual financial report. That's us in every component unit, so there's over 24 component units. A financial statement for the component, the city's financial statements cannot be approved by their board until all component unit financial statements are approved by the board. So we need to approve before the city controllers. If they do it the third week of, they should have it done the third week of June. So we have to try to keep in with that deadline and have everything.
Are you, you're starting 2 weeks earlier than you did last year? No great shakes, I'm not raising the issues, I was just curious to know if there's a reason.
Well, a lot of the audit can be done because a good portion of the audit is based on the cash flows in and out, 12 months of cash flows in and out. We do our cash reconciliations or bank reconciliation on a monthly basis. We try to get it done by the third week of the following month. We could provide all that information actually to the auditors, which they could do. A lot of the estimates that come beyond accounting, where it's not just pure cash that's that's represented on the numbers of the financial statements, are adjusting statements. Those adjusting statements, we do have to wait for city closures to happen. They have to close out the O&M. They have to close out other items that we receive. That doesn't happen until maybe second, third week, maybe even last week of September.
Mm-hmm.
Once we get those numbers, we can post the numbers, but the majority of our work can be done early. There is one last number that has held us up in the past. That is the pension and the OPEB.
The OPEB.
But it's immaterial to us. We think we can get that number in, and we could post it. Any net change is usually done is under $1 million. If we do have to come in, we do have to come in at a certain time. If there's some editing issues, we'll come to the board saying that we are presenting the financial statements in its substance as wholly, that we would think that there might be some minor edits, or and we're going to ask that you approve based on allowing us to do any minor edits. Anything, of course, that becomes substantive, we would have to reconvene. But we don't expect it if we could just stay on time. We don't expect any number to come in, or any material number to come in late.
Okay, thanks,
Thank
Bob.
you.
So next item is selection of accounting principles. Essentially the same as last year. Speaking of Bob, the city is going to early implement an accounting standard on asset retirement obligations, and there's a process underway to see if there's any impact on these financial statements. Not likely to be a significant impact.
Okay.
Item 4 discusses management's responsibility. We just point out that it's management's responsibility to prepare the financial statements, and our responsibility is to perform an audit in accordance with the auditing standards. Bob and his team take really complete responsibility for preparing the financials. We lend really minimal assistance in doing that. We discuss accounting questions and as such during the year, but essentially they take full responsibility for preparing the financials. I mentioned that there's some required communications. One of them is the discussion of the significant estimates that are inherent in the financial statements. These are consistent with prior years. The first is the allowance for uncollectible receivables. Obviously, that's an important number. And we do certain procedures in terms of looking at agings. We look at subsequent cash collections. We look at the analysis that's prepared by management, and we come to a conclusion as to whether or not the allowance that they've recorded is reasonable. Item B, capitalization of utility plant and server. What this is there's really 3 components to it. There's when assets are being constructed, then they're placed in service, where that's when depreciation starts. It's making sure those costs are captured and placed and recorded as a fixed asset, and then starting depreciation. Depreciation's based upon estimated useful lives that are summarized here, so we look at those lives to see if they're reasonable. And then if there's any salvage value reported for assets, we look and see if that's reasonable. So it's really three components to that, and we'll take a look at all three and determine whether the estimates are reasonable. So also pollution remediation obligation recorded, that's $30 million as of the end of June 2017, and that's in accordance with specific GASB statements 49. So we'll take a look at the estimate, whether there's been any remediation progress that's been made, and determine whatever amount that's recorded is reasonable or not. We also look at the fair value of your interest rate swap agreements, which as of June 30th, 2017, there were a negative $100 million, so we'll take a look at those swap valuations and the assumptions inherent in there, and make sure that they're reasonable. E and F are the estimates that we just spoke about. If you look at the dollar amounts, I guess it's a stretch to call these significant estimates because they're so small, so we'll call them interesting estimates, I guess, I don't know. But the first is you're picking up the few employees that you have is the share, you're recording as a liability, the unfunded pension liability for the part of NYSERS as it relates to the water and sewer system. So those are numbers that come to you from the Office of the Actuary. We rely, just so happens that Marks Paneth also audits the pension plan, so we audit NYSERS, and we kind of rely on our own report of the allocation of that liability to the individual employers that are within NYSERS. Similar for the OPEB liability that's reported, it's the water and sewer system's share of the unfunded OPEB liability related to the employees that you have. So we'll look at the calculations done by the Office of the Actuary for those as well. Significant or adjustments recorded at the end of the audit, we'll report to you any adjustments that arose during the course of the audit, either as a result of management coming up with them or us coming up with them as part of the audit. And we'll report them to you when we meet again in October. And we'll also report any adjustments that were not recorded because they were deemed to be immaterial. We'll also report to you any significant items that were discussed with management, any disagreements or difficulties in performing the audit. This will be our third year through. The audits have gone relatively smoothly, I think, and we expect that to. We've got great cooperation. We expect that to continue. If it doesn't, when we come back in October, we'll report any difficulties to you. Item 9 addresses some of the fraud inquiries that I mentioned at the beginning. There's a series of questions, most of which some of relate to conflict of interest, sign-offs, etc. We'll get answers to those during the course of the audit. But for the audit committees present, I'd like to ask you whether you have any knowledge or suspicion of fraud at the system, and whether you're aware of any activities under the whistleblower provisions that you have in place.
No, I'm not.
No takers, good, okay.
Before we go over, could you go back to 7 for a second?
Sure.
And I'm just trying to remember, for the last audit, was there the need to account for and disclose material unusual items? I'm wondering what might have been in that bucket.
That would be, the answer is no. There were none to report, but if there were any significant changes in the way you operate or in the regulatory environment that impacted the financial statements, et cetera, we report those. We discuss those in management report.
Thank you.
Would those also be on the management letter, if you find any? Would we be communicated that way?
Yeah, I mean, that would really be the next item on internal control deficiencies, but, if any of these if we had any of these items, typically, as Bob said, they would be reported in a management letter as kind of a best practice or kind of a heads-up communication to you.
Thank you.
Which kind of segues us into item 10 on internal controls. There's two terms in the auditing standards: material weakness in internal control and significant deficiencies. If we detect any of those items, we'll report them to you as such. If we have any other internal control suggestions or best practice recommendations, we'll provide them to you in a management letter as well. We also do a technology review, which has some comments and recommendations. Those are kind of in the best practice area, so our folks will be following up on last year's suggestions, as well as we'll report any new suggestions that they have for the current year. Item 11, if you've paid attention to last year's, you see we replaced our 45 record-looking diagram with a kind of a timeline chart, and which basically just briefly describes the audit approach. We go through a planning process of understanding any changes in operations, internal controls, permanent file documents that we have in terms of contracts and agreements that we need to have updated, develop an audit plan, carry out the audit plan, and then report to you. So some of the key items that we look for are in part of item number 3. Obviously, there's lots of, on the water board side, it's a large operating type of activity with all the dollars that flow through that organization. On the authority side, you have more restricted investments and debt that we basically confirm with the outside parties. So with that brief description, do any of the audit committee members have any particular areas that they'd like us to take a look at this year?
I just had a quick question about the listing of items for significant management judgments.
Sure.
I noticed that with respect to certain of them, you note, for example, with respect to 5A and 5D, that you will render review as to the reasonableness of the estimate, but not with respect to C. And I haven't gone through all of them to see if where you do and where you don't, but is there some is that just a function of how this was wordsmithed, or is that intentional?
It's a function of how it's wordsmithed. Basically we need to we'll come to a conclusion on all these estimates, and because these estimates will be included in the financial statements. So if we disagree with any of them, to the extent that it results in an audit adjustment, that'll be reported, or a past audit adjustment. But essentially, we're concluding on the reasonableness of all these estimates. It's just really wording.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I don't think we had any takers on the audit approach suggestions, so.
None.
Seems reasonable.
Okay. I'll continue on. Just, I already mentioned some of the, we do some additional procedures relative to fraud that'll probably go a little bit beyond what's required in the auditing standards, in terms of looking at vendors, looking at the top 25 list of vendors and seeing if it appears reasonable, see if we recognize all the vendors, those kind of things. We're also introducing, as most auditors are, data analytics into our audit, where we try to look at large populations of data and come to some conclusions about that data. So we're increasingly doing that. And then our technology assessment, which I already mentioned, includes some procedures relative to cybersecurity, but is not, a full-blown cybersecurity type audit.
Is that something that we ought to think about? I mean, you were asking earlier whether there were topics that the audit committee might want to see you do more work in. Don't want to raise the cost at all. But is that something we ought to be thinking a bit about?
I mean, it's a separate process, and
Yeah.
it essentially is going to relate to the CAS system.
Yeah.
And that there's thoughts in place on an update to that. So it's something that you might want to consider.
Okay.
Just to press that point a bit, where there is actually a recommendation listed in here in the last paragraph in the section entitled Technology Assessment, including Cybersecurity, that makes a recommendation that the board and management consider our own activities to assess cybersecurity preparedness, et cetera.
I see.
Are there specific steps that you recommend that we would undertake in order to accomplish that objective?
Not, not particularly. I mean, if you think about it, you're really doing the same responsibilities and the same considerations for whether you believe that there are adequate internal controls of the system, and other, procedures in place. Cybersecurity just falls within that fold. So I would say that you don't need to do anything specifically, but I think you should have an understanding of what controls would be in place that or discuss with management in terms of whether they believe that the cybersecurity controls are in place and get comfortable with them from that perspective.
And is that something we could do at the Water Finance Authority independently of the city, or would that have to be some kind of a citywide?
It's a mixed bag. It's a little of both.
I mean, I'm thinking, for example, of just to take one potential approach, is it now considered best practice to do penetration testing, let's say? And I would imagine that to do that, we'd have to coordinate with city servers, and how would we go about making sure that we are best positioned in order to have the greatest level of security we can for the data that we have and that belongs to either the Water Board or the Water Finance Authority, and specifically with respect to the Water Board, obviously there's a fair amount of personally identifiable information, people's names, addresses, account numbers, et cetera. And so I have a concern as to what we do in order to safeguard that information.
So, I don't want to put, I don't know if we were prepared for that. I know Joe is here, and we had a little bit of this discussion at the city, I think at the city's audit committee.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to put anybody on the spot either.
No, not to put on the spot, it's just, I
If
just,
something you need to look into, that's fine. I
right,
just
so,
want to make sure we're doing whatever we should be.
So we work in conjunction, again, you have the water, the system is made up of the DEP's, administration, and this is something that's housed with DEP. I think we should allow the folks over there to have this discussion and to address this with you.
The systems, the computer systems are distinct.
And anything about cybersecurity and what's being done over there too.
And just to speak generally, there is a lot of concern, the coordination that's now going on citywide. I don't know if anybody had remembered that the mayor did report, appoint a director of cybersecurity from the mayor's office. That's a good coordinate together for agencies. And to your specific point too, Jonathan, they also are now, there are certain council laws that came out about privacy and protecting privacy of personal data across agencies. So there's an effort to roll it out and have each agency have what's called a privacy officer to make sure that any data is there. So, I mean, that's just a very brief overview, but we could develop that. We'll work with Mark's Planet to make sure that that's all comes out and that we also get that reported out through the audit as well.
And maybe a good topic for our fall meeting for us at the Water Board.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Thank you.
we'll come back and we'll present to you and have a lively discussion of what's being done.
And from your perspective, are there cybersecurity issues relating to the integrity of the accounts, the bank accounts or the investment accounts, for example, or is it principally about individual personal information, in which case I understand that it's on the Water Board side?
Yeah, I mean, on the account information, there are service auditor reports we get for investment custodians that are really them hiring an outside accountant to go audit their system of internal control and then report out what those on the status of those internal controls and what controls need to be in place at the user levels of that service organization to make sure it's a complete internal control stream. So that's that, and the other part is, on the confidentiality of the information, but also on, just your business continuity considerations. So if your customer information system was out of business for a period of time, that has an impact on your revenue stream. So it's really not just stealing the data, but it's also making sure that your billing, your billing collections are kind of an uninterrupted stream.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for paying attention to that and reading it. The other matters, contingencies, we confirm with the city water department and any outside attorneys. Peer review report. There's a copy of that attached to our engagement letter, so just to briefly describe that. Outside auditors that do audits are under various requirements are required to have an audit of ourselves every 3 years. So we hire another accounting firm to come in and review our audit process and controls over CPE, audit quality, client acceptance, etc. So that was done in December of 2017 for the period ended June 30th, 2016. We have a pass opinion, which doesn't sound good, but that's kind of the highest you can get. It's pass with deficiencies, or fail. So getting a pass is good, is kind of the best you can get. So auditors just don't like to have any bravado about that. Just the pass is good.
Congratulations.
Took that test, pass, fail.
Item 13, we confirm that we're independent, and then item 14 lists a series of new GASB statements, which I'm not going to go through. I already mentioned the asset retirement obligation statement, which is in the process of being reviewed. We're not expected to have a major impact on your financial statements. And then there's some other statements regarding some relate to debt issuance disclosures, some relate to defeasance disclosures, et cetera. But I wouldn't expect those to have a big impact on your financial statements. The biggest one in the GASB world is 87 on leases, where for both revenue leases and instances where you're the lessees. This statement follows a similar model, but it applies to both revenue leases and expense leases, where you record the present value of future minimum lease payments on your balance sheet with an offsetting if you're the lessee, like right to use asset. If you're the lessor, you'd have a receivable offset by a deferred inflow of resources. So if you have a lot of leases, it's a big data gathering effort, and lots of accounting decisions that need to be made in terms of how those are recorded.
And this will be big for us, because as most of the assets are the system, although they are again administered or the responsibility of DP. We're going to have to ask them to look at every single lease and basically everything that we consider as an operating lease before anything more than 1 year is going to be considered a capital lease. And it's looking into them and defining the terms, putting the interest rates, calculating the present value. So it's going to be a lot of work.
With the city's rental payment for the system, or the water board's rental payment for the system, the city count
Right,
under
so
this?
they're tangible. I don't think that's part of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a definition of what's considered a lease,
Yeah.
so we'd have to review that
Right.
to see whether it's.
I don't think so,
It's a
but-
lease in the true sense
Yeah.
of the word.
That's a lease.
I acted the same reaction, and I hope you'll focus on it, because it's we were fortunate insofar as the mayor has returned the lease payment, but as far as I understand it, the theoretical legal obligation has not been extinguished, and therefore I just draw your attention to that in terms of how this
Right.
gets treated. It's
So
obviously something that
there-
needs to be thought about.
There is specific definitions of the lease. May the naming of something be called a lease, or not the naming of something will be called a lease. We need to look at the substance of it and define if it is a lease according to the accounting.
Thank you.
We will
As
do
someone
that,
who
and
tried to
then
turn the lease into
Warren
a
will
sale
actually
once, I'm not
review
gonna
it.
comment.
Yeah, so we see this very similar to, since again, we don't have custodianship over
Yes.
here at the Water Finance Authority. We see this as a citywide effort, where all the agencies will be reporting this to the City Controller's Office, and we'll be working with the City Controller's Office and the auditors, and actually recording it, and the auditors will be testing it.
So the
And
decisions-
this is far in the future, I think
Yeah.
it's 2020.
It's got a couple-
2022 or something, I'm not sure. So,
It's fiscal year is beginning after December 15, 2019.
19, so 2020.
2021.
Not
Okay,
so far this
2020.
future.
So, you know, everybody in my industry says, okay, that's okay, I think I'm gonna be retired by then, so it's fine. That's it.
Wishful thinking.
Yeah.
Or maybe relook at how to sell it before that lease is up.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are trying to come up with ways, but I think the definition is clear. So again, if you name it a lease or not name it a lease, you look at the substance of the transaction.
Yeah, and, you know, for a straight, like plain vanilla, 5-year, well, copier lease, it's
Copier
probably
lease.
not that hard.
Right.
But, you know, if you start thinking about things like, well, what if if you're figuring out the lease term, what if there's a renewal option? Should I consider a renewal option period or not? What if there's a termination clause? What if the lease payments are variable? Like, you know, if you have stores leasing on public property and it's the lease payment plus a percentage of sales, what do I include in my liability? So there's lots of decisions along the way that need to be made.
But the city's gonna make those decisions. What we can count on is that we will be guided by the decisions that the city of New York makes at that level as opposed to the individual agency level.
So it's a lot of gathering, so the agency would have to gather the information, analyze the information, and the information is good as the actual agency itself individually analyzing and gathering and recording the information. This is where the auditors and ourselves will come in and make sure that they're complete, since it's gonna be recorded on our books.
So there could be different definitions for leases
There's
in
one-
different agencies.
Right, so there's one definition, there might be different folks trying to interpret it differently, but I think when we roll it out, we're going to be as specific as possible.
Okay.
And give them, because there actually, I think there's gonna be an implementation
Okay.
tool on this.
Yeah.
So I think we need to communicate exactly what has to be done. But you know, what's interesting here is that ultimately, what we record periodically as the expense, you're not gonna have a big difference as what's gonna happen to be charged into your net position. But what's gonna happen is you have to put this amount on the top and an opposing amount on your balance sheet, and then you have to, you know, amortize it. But the actual amount that you're charging every year is gonna be very simple if you're paying out an operating expense.
Got it.
But it's going to be a very large undertaking because it's every lease that we have out there.
Zillions of
Or
them.
or contract that needs to be
Yeah.
examined.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill.
So that's my required communications. Any other questions on that before we move along? Finally, the last tab is a draft of our engagement letter, which consists of 90% legalese that accountants use, that's thoroughly vetted by the OMB council folks. And the fees that are in here are in accordance with our contract, so there's nothing.
How do they compare with last year?
The fees?
Yeah.
I think there's about a 4 or 5% increase built in from year to year. Yeah, so it's similar.
I had a question about the last paragraph in section 1 in the letter, which is on the second page. You reference the report that will be provided on internal control, and in a parenthetical, exclude providing an opinion. Do you mean by that the term of art, an opinion, like an opinion letter? Because I assume that if you were to identify some sort of internal control weakness, you're exercising judgment and letting us know that that's an issue. So there's an element of opinion in it. So I'm inferring that you mean you're not rendering a formal opinion letter, but you will nonetheless exercise your judgment with respect to internal controls. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes. We issue an opinion on the financial statements, but we issue a report on internal control based upon our consideration of internal control relative to our financial statement audit. It's different if you were a publicly traded company, Sarbanes-Oxley reporting. You're required to have an opinion on your internal control over financial reporting as well. So that there's no requirement in the government sector to have that. So under government auditing standards, we have a report on internal control. So it's a lesser form of assurance on internal control than our opinion on the financial statements.
But in terms of the work product, that's really in terms of how that affects, how, the extent to which third parties, let's say, could rely on it, as opposed to the extent to which you would flag something for us if your processes identified something that you thought might be a problem with internal controls, I assume.
Yeah, although for purposes of rendering that a report, which is one of the reports that's required in accordance with government auditing standards, it requires us to gain an understanding of internal control, confirm that understanding, do walkthroughs, et cetera, and then take that into consideration in formulating our audit process. So if we think the controls are good or bad, we can, that impacts how we design the audit. But we don't actually test, not required to test whether the controls are actually in place. We're just required to gain that understanding.
And that's not standard procedure in the government accounting space.
Correct. Correct. Which is in case this comes up in another area, I just don't want you to be confused. If we were doing your single audit of your federal awards programs, for each of the major programs that you have, the auditor issues an opinion on compliance with that program. Then there's a report on compliance. It's a report on internal controls over compliance, which requires the auditors to do some testing, but still not to issue an opinion on it. So, I know I'm parsing words, but it's kind of how it's kind of how the rules are set and the requirements are set out.
Because I'm asking you to do it. Thanks so much.
It's okay.
Sorry. Get into the minutia.
Yeah. So with that, be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I think you have. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we get to keep these?
Yeah, absolutely. Dan doesn't want to carry them back.
Well said.
So I think that's the last item of business we have. If anyone else has any new business items they'd like to bring up, now's the time. If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Any objection? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.